Abroad, I rescued my husband from kidnappers, giving him all the ransom money to escape while I was sold for 6 years. When I returned back home, I found he had already had 2 children with his mistress. He, his mistress, and their children humiliated me as a family, forcing me to eat dog food, and he even laughed, saying, "The kidnapping was planned by the 2 of us, aiming to use your ransom to get rich." I immediately contacted Victor abroad, secretly collecting ironclad evidence of their conspiracy to kidnap and commit tax evasion, and handed it all directly to the police. Soon after they were sentenced to life imprisonment, they and their entire family were driven to their deaths by debt collectors due to their massive debts. I paid his ransom, but he abandoned me to my fate 6 years ago. My husband and I were traveling in a foreign country when we were kidnapped. Our family's money was only enough to ransom one person. For Ethan Miller, I resolutely stayed in a foreign country, letting Ethan Miller go back home. As for me, I met a boss, Victor. He ransomed me, asking me to work by his side for 6 years, after which he would let me go. From then on, I became his most capable associate. Finally, in the 6th year, I helped Victor resolve all the matters he had on hand and embarked on my journey back home. But I never imagined that when I returned back home, I would find Ethan Miller had already achieved great success in his career, yet he had never thought of rescuing me. He was with his first love and had even had a son and a daughter with her. In my fury, I demanded to know from Ethan Miller why he hadn't waited for me, why he hadn't rescued me when he clearly had the money. He looked at me with indifference and said, "Grace, why would I rescue you? You've been sold countless times in the last 6 years, who knows if you're clean anymore?" I listened to his almost heartless words and laughed. So the man I was willing to dedicate my life to saw me this way. At that moment, all I had left for Ethan Miller was hatred. Since that was the case, what he owed me, he should pay back. Grace, our marriage is still valid. My company needs to go public with its IPO now. If you come back at this time, there's no way I can divorce you. He looked at me and said coldly, after all, if he divorced me, he would have to give up a large sum of money, which was something he didn't want to see happen, coupled with the sacrifice I made to save him 6 years ago. If news of Ethan Miller divorcing me broke out now, his company's IPO plan would definitely be put on hold. But I shook my head and said, "Ethan Miller, we're getting a divorce." He didn't speak but waved his hand to the people behind him. The next moment, I was tied up by several people and thrown into a room. "You can calm down here." Ethan Miller looked at me indifferently and said, "Remember, as long as you're obedient, you'll still be Mrs. Miller. I'll make sure you live very well, and in the future, my children will take care of you in your old age. But if you don't cooperate, I can send you back out of the country." He looked at me coldly and said chillingly, then he turned and left. I was confined to the room by Ethan Miller, with 2 bodyguards watching outside the door, giving me no chance to leave. However, Ethan Miller hadn't confiscated my phone. In his opinion, I had barely escaped from a foreign country, and now I didn't even have anyone to help me. He probably thought someone like me, who had escaped, might not even have a phone, which was why he forgot to check. But he didn't know that I hadn't returned alone. I dialed Victor's phone number. "Victor, I need your help." I spoke softly, and as I said those words, tears streamed uncontrollably down my face. "I told you long ago. If he could abandon you and escape alone back then, he certainly wouldn't stay loyal to you for a lifetime. I'll be there within 3 days. Stay at the Miller residence for 3 days, and I'll come to help you soon." Victor's voice sounded from the phone. It put my mind at ease. What Ethan Miller didn't know was that on the day he was ransomed, Victor had appeared before me. Not only had I never been touched, but these past years, I had even lived exceptionally well. In fact, to reward me, Victor had given me a lot of money now. I possessed more assets than Ethan Miller. Unfortunately, none of it concerned him anymore. Since Victor wouldn't arrive for 3 days, I could only stay at the Miller residence. What I didn't expect was that Ethan Miller came to my room that very night. He sat in front of me and looked at me, saying, "Grace, as long as you behave, I'll divorce you once my company goes public with its IPO. However, at that time, you'll have to sign an agreement. I'll give you $1 million, and you can take that money and leave. Brittany and I are together, and we have our children. All my assets will definitely be theirs in the future." Listening to Ethan Miller's words, I couldn't help but sneer. 6 years ago, for Ethan Miller, I willingly gave up everything, even selling all my assets back home. just so he could escape. I still remember Ethan Miller hugging me before he left, repeatedly saying he would raise money once he returned. He also told me to wait for him, no matter what, but what happened after he returned back home? He quickly got together with Brittany because they're two children. The eldest one was already 5 years old. Clearly, he had no intention of rescuing me after he returned back home. In fact, he had long thought I was tainted and unworthy of him, but if it weren't for him, how would I have fallen to such a state? When he suggested that trip, I didn't want to go. Moreover, the money to ransom him came from selling my own house. Now, looking at Ethan Miller before me, I sneered and said, "Ethan Miller, I understand. It was only 3 days anyway. I knew Victor had many connections back home. As soon as Victor arrived, everything would be resolved. As for Ethan Miller, I didn't care at all. All right then. Sign it." Ethan Miller handed me a document. I glanced at the document. Ethan Miller and I could divorce, and he would compensate me $1 million. I signed without hesitation. "Ethan Miller, I've signed the divorce papers. Can I leave now?" I looked at him and said coldly, "Of course not. These next few days, you'll stay at my house. You can only leave after my company goes public with its IPO." He looked at me indifferently and said, after saying that. Ethan Miller stood up and walked towards the door. The 2 bodyguards at the door immediately blocked me, preventing me from leaving. At that moment, I looked at Ethan Miller and helplessly shook my head. I knew he couldn't possibly let me leave at that moment. I sat in the room, thinking about everything I had given up for Ethan Miller, and tears streamed uncontrollably for this man I had given my youth, but I ended up like this. After crying myself tired, I finally felt hungry. After all, I hadn't eaten anything all day. I opened the door, just wanting them to get me some food, but I didn't expect to be stopped by the 2 bodyguards. "I need to eat," I said indifferently, but the 2 bodyguards merely glanced at me and shook their heads coldly. They ignored me and wouldn't let me out. At that moment, my heart grew even colder. Ethan Miller made me sign the divorce papers, held me captive at the Miller residence, yet wouldn't even give me a bite to eat. Just as I was about to argue with the bodyguards, a woman walked in carrying a basin. She looked at me with a smile on her face. Behind her were 2 children. At that moment, both children were glaring at me, especially Liam Miller, who pointed at me and said, "Mommy, is this the home wrecker?" Hearing that, I looked at Liam with indifference and said chillingly, "I'm not a home wrecker. Your mother is. You bad person. Not only are you trying to steal my dad, but you're also calling my mom a home wrecker. I'll beat you to death," he said, and then lunged at me. At the same time, his small fists directly struck me. I looked at Liam and coldly pushed him away. Immediately, Liam fell to the ground, and for a moment, he cried very sadly. Brittany looked at me, her face pale with anger. Suddenly, she directly told the 2 bodyguards, "Hold her down for me." The 2 bodyguards immediately pinned me to the ground. At the same time, Brittany stepped forward and slapped me twice. My face stung from the blows, but I glared fiercely at Brittany. "Grace, let me tell you, Ethan Miller and I are truly in love." "Do you think Ethan Miller really loves you? You have no idea that the kidnapping back then was also planned by Ethan Miller and those kidnappers. He knew long ago that you would give up everything for him, so he orchestrated that kidnapping. Ethan Miller got half of the ransom you paid. He built his business today using that ransom money." Looking at me, Brittany's smile was exceptionally cold at that moment. She said, "Because at that time, I was already pregnant with Ethan Miller's child." Hearing that, my face grew even paler. I hadn't expected all of this to be orchestrated by Ethan Miller, so everything Ethan Miller said to me back then was a lie. "Grace, you were in that kind of place. You must have been sold many times, right? You must be very good at pleasing men by now. A woman like you only deserves to be treated like a dog." Brittany looked at me and said viciously. At the same time, she placed a basin in front of me. I saw her take out a bag of dog food and pour it into the basin, saying coldly, "Someone like you doesn't deserve good food. You only deserve dog food," she said, and then slapped me again. At the same time, she grabbed a handful of dog food and shoved it directly into my mouth. I desperately tried to spit the dog food out, but she held my mouth shut tightly. She forced me to swallow it. At that moment, Brittany looked at me and said, "Grace, I'm telling you, Ethan Miller won't be back for the next 2 days. You'd better stay here obediently. As for food, this is all you deserve," she said, and then threw a bag of dog food at me. Liam watched me being pinned to the ground and having dog food shoved into my mouth by his mother, and he immediately laughed happily. "Good. A home wrecker like this should eat dog food. You're just a little dog. A dog nobody loves, trying to steal my dad from my mom," he said, still not satisfied, and ran up to me, stomping his small feet on my face a few times before triumphantly leaving. As for Brittany, she looked at me and said, "Grace, you can't handle this. You should think about it. In a place like that, you learn to please men every day. You must be used to a life like that by now. Hey Emph, maybe you just got sick and nobody wanted you anymore, so they let you go." I glared furiously at Brittany, but she gave a triumphant smile and turned to leave. I knew Brittany wouldn't bother with me anymore at this point. I watched the two bodyguards close the door, then secretly took out my phone and dialed Victor's number. "Victor, they still won't give me food," suppressing my humiliation. I spoke. "Brittany forced me to eat dog food. These past years, I had always helped Victor with his business. He gave me countless riches. Not only had I never suffered, but I lacked for nothing. It had been a long time since I felt such profound humiliation." On the other end of the phone, Victor said coldly, "After tonight, I will appear before you." I could hear the anger in Victor's voice. After hanging up, I secretly hid my phone. I knew this phone was my key to survival now. I didn't choose to call the police because I knew that even if I did, Ethan Miller would find a way to keep me confined at home. He could even claim that I had suffered too much abuse in a foreign country and had gone insane. Once the police left, my situation might become even more miserable. I silently endured the hunger and fell into a deep sleep. The next morning, I saw Ethan Miller again. As soon as he entered the room, he slapped me directly. "Grace, you vicious woman. How dare you hit my son? I just didn't rescue you, and you dared to lay a hand on a child," he said, his face grim, and slapped me again. That slap made my cheeks swell, and my mouth filled with the taste of blood. I knew that slap had made my mouth bleed, but even seeing me like that, he still ignored me and immediately kicked me. That kick landed on my stomach, making my face contort in pain. I was hit by Ethan Miller's kick, and immediately, I screamed and curled into a ball. Even seeing me so miserable, he wouldn't let me go, continuously punching and kicking me. His son stood at the door, clapping and cheering. "Good, good. She needs to know her place, that home wrecker. Daddy is so great." Daddy made the home wrecker cry. Liam clapped his hands repeatedly and shouted, "Grace, I'm warning you. If you dare touch my son again, I'll kill you." Ethan Miller grabbed my hair and said viciously. At that moment, looking at Ethan Miller, my eyes filled with fear. He had truly lost his mind. "Daddy, I want to hit her too. Kill her quickly." Liam still pointed at me and shouted loudly. Hearing Liam's words, Ethan Miller turned back, smiled, and nodded. "Okay, don't worry, good son. Daddy will teach this woman a good lesson today," he said, staring at me, preparing to strike me again. At that moment, all I felt was terror. Even when I was kidnapped, those kidnappers hadn't hit me so brutally. Just as I despairingly thought Ethan Miller would beat me to death, Brittany's startled cry came from outside the door. "Who are you? Why are you breaking into my house?" Hearing that voice, my spirits lifted. I knew Victor had arrived. Inside the room, Ethan Miller had clearly heard the noise too. He stood up and quickly walked towards the door. The two bodyguards at the door also followed him, but the next moment, the two bodyguards at the door were pinned down. I saw Victor. He walked quickly, and when he saw my miserable state, his expression immediately darkened. He stared at Ethan Miller and said coldly, "Pull out all this guy's teeth." He was exceptionally angry. He walked quickly towards me, and as he passed Liam, he kicked Liam immediately. Liam let out a scream and passed out from Victor's kick. Victor quickly came to me and looked at me with heartache. "I told you long ago that this man couldn't be relied upon. You wouldn't listen." Victor looked at me and sighed. "Don't worry. I'll get back all the injustices you've suffered." I threw myself into Victor's arms at that moment. I sobbed uncontrollably. For these 6 years, I had been his capable assistant. No matter what, I had handled everything for Victor meticulously. He had never seen me so vulnerable. At that moment, he was even flustered, awkwardly trying to comfort me. At the same time, he turned to look at Ethan Miller. Victor's bodyguards were truly ruthless. They pried open Ethan Miller's mouth and genuinely began pulling out his teeth. I watched Ethan Miller's tears stream down his face from the pain. He couldn't even beg for mercy. As for Brittany, she was crying while holding her son. "Who are you? You broke into our house and hurt my son. I'm calling the police on you." Victor heard her words, looked at Brittany coldly, and then pointed at her. "Is this the woman who forced you to eat dog food?" "Yes." I cried in humiliation. Seeing my tears, Victor pointed coldly at Brittany and said, "Shove the dog food into her mouth." Hearing this, several bodyguards quickly pinned Brittany down, also prying open her mouth and pouring the dog food directly into it. The basin full of dog food nearly choked Brittany. She struggled desperately, even showing a pleading expression, but neither I nor Victor even glanced at Brittany. I had seen such things many times during my years in a foreign country. Comparatively speaking, Victor was already very restrained back home. "Let's go. I'll take you out to eat something." Victor looked at me and said, "As for their family, I'll find a way to help you get back everything you lost. This is back home after all." I knew what Victor meant. It was okay to teach them a lesson, but if they were truly killed, that would be bad. I nodded and got up with Victor, preparing to leave behind me. Ethan Miller glared at me and shouted, "Grace, you said you were clean in a foreign country? Who is this man?" "Ethan Miller. Who he is has nothing to do with you." I looked at Ethan Miller, who had already had 3 teeth broken, and said coldly, "You and I are already divorced." Hearing Ethan Miller's question, Victor stepped forward and kicked Ethan Miller. His leather shoe directly struck Ethan Miller's nose. The next moment, Ethan Miller cried out in pain. I saw his nasal bone was broken, and he lay on the ground screaming. "Someone like you isn't worthy of questioning Grace." After saying that, Victor took me and left. Victor arranged for me to stay in a hotel. He told me that he had returned this time specifically to help me get revenge. In fact, Victor took out a document and handed it to me. All the evidence of Ethan Miller's tax evasion and fraud over the years is here. Listening to Victor's words, I was filled with surprise. Also, I've already contacted Ethan Miller's investors. Not only has he evaded taxes and committed fraud these past years, but he's also secretly swindled a lot of money from investors. Victor looked at me and said, "And Brittany has taken a lot of money from Ethan Miller's company over these years. Once these things are exposed, both he and Brittany will go to prison." Hearing this, I understood that the reason Victor had come so late was to collect this evidence. I've already contacted Ethan Miller's investors and told them about these matters. Next, Ethan Miller is doomed. Hearing Victor say this, I smiled. "Thank you, Victor." I looked at Victor and said with a smile. Hearing that, Victor waved his hand and said, "You've earned me so much money over the years. How could I not help when you're being bullied?" He then handed me another document and said, "Actually, I've been aware of Ethan Miller's actions all these years. That's why I didn't want you to come back. These past years, I invested a sum of money into Ethan Miller's company. He has now embezzled a lot of company funds. The evidence is all here. As a company shareholder, you have the right to demand a thorough investigation by the police." When I heard Victor's words, my eyes widened instantly. I hadn't expected Victor to have prepared all this beforehand. I took the document Victor handed me, then looked at him gratefully and said, "I understand, Victor. All right. I won't get involved in these matters from now on." He said, "I'll leave the bodyguards with you. After you've done all this, come back and continue working for me." "Okay, Victor. I'm willing to work for you my entire life." When I heard this, I quickly declared, if it weren't for Victor, I couldn't even imagine what my life would have been like in that place. Additionally, Ethan Miller's contact with those people back then was recorded. This is incriminating evidence. After Victor handed me everything, he told me he would be waiting for me in a foreign country. As for him, he wouldn't be involved. He had a lot of things to deal with in a foreign country, and since I had left, he had been too busy. I personally saw Victor off at the airport. At the airport, I hugged him and said, "Victor, wait for me to come back." "Okay." He heard my words, smiled, and gently patted my back. "I'm waiting for you." "Yes, Victor. I'll handle everything quickly and then come back to you." I looked at Victor and said, after Victor left, I took the bodyguards and prepared to go directly to the police. After all, I had complete evidence now. But I didn't expect that as soon as I turned around, I saw Ethan Miller outside the airport. He was with a group of officers. When he saw me, he immediately shouted, "Officer, it's this woman. She sent people to my house, vandalized it, and even injured me and my son. Arrest her quickly." Hearing that, I looked at Ethan Miller with a cold smile. He had actually called the police first. Since that was the case, we could handle everything at once. Ethan Miller and I were both taken to the police station. At the police station, I looked at the officers before me and said, "Officer, I also want to report a crime. Ethan Miller slandered me. I was unlawfully confined by Ethan Miller," I said, and then pulled out my phone. During the days I was confined to the room by Ethan Miller, I was afraid he would harm me. So I had secretly turned on the video recording mode on my phone. He had no idea that the scenes of Brittany and him brutally beating me were clearly recorded by the phone. Even Brittany telling me that Ethan Miller was involved in planning my kidnapping back then was recorded. When the officers saw the content, their expressions immediately changed as they looked at Ethan Miller. I was just seeking help from outside, so someone rescued me. It wasn't me who vandalized his house at all. I pointed at the video and said, hearing my words. Ethan Miller's expression drastically changed. He hadn't expected that not only did I have evidence, but I could also prove that he had confined me. Then, I took a USB drive from one of the bodyguards and handed it to the officer, saying, "Here's also a video of Ethan Miller conspiring with those kidnappers back then," I said, handing the USB drive to the officer. With this evidence, Ethan Miller's expression immediately changed. He looked at me and said coldly, "Grace, are you really going to do this to me?" I didn't speak but coldly took out the document I held. "Officer, this is the document of our company's investment in Ethan Miller's company. So I am still a shareholder in Ethan Miller's company. And Ethan Miller has long been embezzling company funds," I said, handing a document to the officer. "As a shareholder, I have the right to demand that you investigate thoroughly, and I will terminate the company's IPO plan." As soon as my words fell, Ethan Miller's expression drastically changed. "Grace, don't lie. When did our company have you as a shareholder?" Hearing that, Brittany immediately said anxiously, both of them had high-stakes financial agreements with other shareholders. If the company's IPO was terminated, they would have to pay a lot of money in compensation. Moreover, what would they do after all the things they had done? I didn't speak but looked at the officers and said, "Please dispatch both criminal investigation and economic investigation personnel to intervene." My words made the officers understand that this was a major case, so, very quickly, many people arrived and took Ethan Miller, me, and others to the city police department. With overwhelming evidence, Ethan Miller couldn't refute anything. He looked at me, then suddenly ran up to me and said, "Grace, withdraw the lawsuit. As long as you withdraw the lawsuit, these company embezzlements won't matter, and the criminal investigation department won't pursue the kidnapping case. After all, it's been so many years. Grace, I promise you, as long as you withdraw the lawsuit, I'm willing to stay with you again." I looked at Ethan Miller's shameless demeanor and laughed. I asked coldly, "Ethan Miller, if you're with me, what about Brittany?" Hearing that, Ethan Miller's expression changed. Then he lowered his voice and said, "Grace, don't worry, I'll handle Brittany." "How will you handle her?" I looked at Ethan Miller with amusement. Even now, he still thought I would forgive him. He even thought I would give up everything for him. At that moment, I couldn't help but doubt my judgment back then, but my judgment was indeed poor otherwise. I wouldn't have fallen for Ethan Miller. "I'll make Brittany leave and have the 2 children recognize you as their mother. That way, you won't need to have children to have 2 sons, and you can be with me." When Ethan Miller said that, I laughed until tears almost streamed down my face. I never imagined he could be so utterly shameless. "Ethan Miller, do you think that's possible?" I looked at Ethan Miller with a cold sneer. "What do those 2 children have to do with me? Moreover, do you think a simple apology can undo the harm you've caused me? So, Ethan Miller, don't even think about it. You and I, it's long been impossible." After saying that, I looked at Ethan Miller coldly and said, "Just prepare to go to prison. With all the crimes you've committed, you'll be in prison for at least 20 years. It might even be life imprisonment." I stared coldly at Ethan Miller. At the same time, I turned to look at Brittany, who was glaring at me with venomous eyes, and said with a smile, "As for you, I guarantee you'll also go to prison, starting with 10 years. At that time, your children will become orphans." As soon as my words fell, Brittany's and Ethan Miller's expressions changed. Ethan Miller kept begging me to spare them. Seeing my indifference, he even tried to lay hands on me, but he was stopped by my bodyguards. When I left, he and Brittany had already been detained. As for the 2 children, they were placed in an orphanage by the police. A few days later, the police told me that the evidence had been collected, and with complete evidence, Ethan Miller had no way to appeal the verdict. He was sentenced to life imprisonment, and Brittany, for her involvement in planning my kidnapping and embezzling a huge amount of company funds, was also sentenced to a lengthy prison sentence of over 10 years. Both of their children were sent to the orphanage, becoming orphans with no one to care for them. When I heard this news, I smiled. then bought a plane ticket back. Victor was still waiting for me. I returned to a foreign country and continued to work for Victor, who cared for me meticulously. He told me that from the first moment he saw me, he had fallen in love with me. However, at that time, my heart was only for Ethan Miller, so he hadn't taken the initiative to confess his feelings to me. I accepted Victor's love, and we soon got married. Our married life was sweet, and we quickly had our own child. One day, Victor came home from work and looked at me, saying, "Ethan Miller and Brittany are both dead. Even their children are dead." Hearing that, I was a little surprised. They signed high-stakes financial agreements with several financial groups because the company ultimately failed to go public with its IPO, and they embezzled too many assets and committed financial fraud. That company became worthless. How could those financial groups let their family off? Listening to Victor's words, I smiled and said, "If they're dead, then they're dead." For me, their family no longer mattered. Now, I had people I cared about.